Well, I don't have to be here. I hope you know that. As an official representative of the Roman army, still in active duty, I don't have to talk to you if I don't want to. I just thought it would be a good idea to clear the air before we start. It's important for you to know who I am. I have fought fierce battles against the enemies with superior numbers. I have seen men die for their country and their king. I have even brought enemy soldiers to their knees and to their graves in honor of Rome. I have been held at attention when the governor passed by, and I have held off angry crowds at the gate of the palace. I have pierced the flesh of anarchist and terrorist, and I have saved the life of my ruler on more than one occasion. I am only here today because you need to know what happened. Yes, I admit I am relegated to guard duty now. It's more like semi-retirement than active duty on the front lines. I have been assigned to crucifixion crowd control. I'm not sure whether that means I'm supposed to keep the criminals from escaping or whether that means I'm supposed to keep the crowd from killing the criminals. Whatever I'm supposed to do, I will do the best I can. That's what being a spear is all about. Well, I'll start in the courtyard. That's where I first came into contact with the accused. He was on trial for heresy and treason. They said he was a threat to the government because he called himself king. I didn't see him as being any threat to any of us for anything, even at my age. I could have handled his followers. They weren't even armed. Nothing to be afraid of. Well, it's just as well, because it wasn't much of a trial. He was found guilty and condemned. And I found that really strange. There were no real charges against him. The witnesses kept telling different stories and contradicting each other. And when Pilate saw the same thing I did and said, well, he's innocent, the mob took control and frightened Pilate into giving out a death sentence. I've been on duty at many trials, and I can tell you this, that Jesus got a raw deal. But the sentence was handed down, and it was time to start that long walk up the hill. And that trip was crazy. Some of the time I was used to hold back the people who screamed he was innocent. Some were pushing towards us, just wanting to touch him, hoping to be healed from some illness. This was not your usual crucifixion crowd. I've never heard such a variety of noises from a crowd. There was cursing and yelling, and then we'd walk a step or two further, and I would hear someone praying for him or saying that they loved him. And if that sounds crazy, Trust me, it really was. We finally made it to the top of the hill. I got tossed on the ground. The soldier who was holding me, I guess he figured I wouldn't be needed to hold back this crowd. The morning sun was getting hot, hotter and hotter, and I'm laying here in the dirt. At first, I was directly in the sun's rays, and I could feel my staff drying out, my point getting hot. But then, as time went on, I started to cool as the shadow of the cross passed over me. I was thankful for the shade. It seemed odd to be thankful because an innocent man was hanging there on the cross, but selfishly, I felt better. I was given relief. It's amazing how different the shadow of the cross was. And as I laid there, I could look straight up at him. His head hung down, and I could see agony on his face. He seemed like a person who had been deeply hurt. I don't mean pain from the whippings or the thorns or the nails in his hands. I mean hurt like when you've been betrayed. That's it. Betrayed. Here I had felt betrayed, being stuck with this crummy crucifixion duty, but that's nothing compared to what he had been through. I heard that one of his own followers betrayed him. Another had denied that he even knew him. And all of them had run when he was arrested. He seemed to have the weight of all of the betrayals of all time on his shoulders. And you could see it in his face. And yet, even with all that agony, the words he said were words of love. If I was a human being and I was being treated like that, you wouldn't hear any words of love coming from me. Things like, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Only a very special person would talk like that at a time like this. And you know what? He meant what he said. He really, truly meant it. You could tell in his voice. You could see it on his face. When he spoke those words of forgiveness, that prayer, the agony on his face turned to contentment, as though he knew his prayer was being answered. He looked at peace. He was no criminal. He was no threat to the government. What this world needs is more people like him. Could you imagine what this world would be like if his kind of love could be found in a lot more people? The guard came over and picked me up. I thought we were done. It was time to leave. But the guards said that the bodies could not be left on the crosses because of Passover, so it was decided to help the men die a little faster. The soldiers were instructed to break the criminals' legs, and they took care of the other two guys as they were instructed, but then they saw the one in the middle, Jesus, had already died. So instead of breaking his legs, it was decided to check and make sure that he was dead. That's where I came in. I was lifted up towards him. My first thought was that I wanted to get another look at his face, but his eyes were closed in death. His heart had stopped. I did get closer to his heart than I expected. You see, in order to make sure that he was dead, I was thrust into his side with a thrust that felt as though all mankind was pushing me in, not just this one lonely soldier. And what I found in there was a broken heart, a heart that once had beat with love. Anyone watching would probably assume that heart had been broken by hate. But I quickly found out that was not true. Yes, there had been love in every heartbeat until he died, but the hatred had not beaten him. I found that out as I was pulled from his side. His blood flowed out with me. As that blood poured over me, I had a feeling shoot through me from the tip of my point to the end of my staff. I felt sharper than I had ever been. I felt polished to a flawless sheen. I felt as though I was getting stronger instead of weaker as I grew old. I knew if I had been a real person, he even would have forgiven me for what I had to do. And I have to tell you this. I'm not alone. You had an active role in all of this. It was the sins of everyone, and that includes you. Those sins broke his heart and caused him to suffer and to die. That's why he hung there, because someone had to pay the price of sin, and he did not want it to be you. So he took your place. The most important part is still to come a couple of days later, but that's another story. In the meantime, we can rest assured the blood that flowed from that wound, the wound that I caused, came with the power to cleanse and to purify, to restore and to renew. Isn't it interesting that a painful wound could be used by God to allow his love and his forgiveness to flow out to all the world? Do you get the point? Amen.